Late Night Live with Phil Williams
on BBC Radio 5 Live.
8 minutes past 11 Tuesday night. A medical tribunal has ruled that a doctor who was struck off over the death of a 6-year-old boy can return to work. In 2015, Dr Bawa-Garba was found guilty of manslaughter by gross negligence over the death of Jack Adcock. She was struck off from the medical register in January of 2018, but appealed against the decision, and in August won her bid to practice medicine again. A campaign to allow her to work again argued low staffing and frontline pressures were partly to blame for what had happened in the circumstances around Jack's death. This is what Dr Bawa-Garba had to say back in August of last year when she won that appeal.
I'm very pleased with the outcome, but I want us to pay tribute and remember Jack Adcock, a wonderful little boy that started this story. I want to let the parents know that I am sorry for my role in what has happened to Jack. And I also want to acknowledge and give gratitude to people around the world, from the public to the medical community, who have supported me. I am overwhelmed by the generosity, and I'm really grateful for that.
In 2011, Jack Adcock, who had Down syndrome and a heart condition, died from a cardiac arrest caused by sepsis, 11 hours after being admitted to Leicester Royal Infirmary. Jack's mum, Nikki Adcock, gave her reaction to today's ruling to 5 Live.
Do you know what? I actually, one of the point where I was actually lost for words, for me, that is, that doesn't happen. I was just so shocked that she could actually be let back, that someone with a gross negligence manslaughter charge for the death of a child can actually be, let back into a hospital. I don't understand it. I just think because she's got a gross negligence manslaughter charge, everybody, even the judge was saying this will be the end of her career and everything else. So I think everybody assumed that she'd be struck off, which she was. When the GMC challenged her, she was struck off. The fact is, she took our son away. My son was 6.5 years old. He'd be 15 in July. She's been given another chance. We've not been given another chance. Our son's been taken away. We have to live with that day in, day out because of her neglect and her errors. It might be the fact that she's been supervised, but that still doesn't take away the fact that she should never be allowed to go back into a hospital. I'm guessing if you go out and speak to the general public, as in normal people, not doctors, that 99.9% people will tell you they would not let her anywhere near their children.
So earlier this evening I spoke to Dr Samantha Batt Rawden, who's chair of the independent doctor-led lobby group, the Doctors Association UK, and this is her reaction to the ruling.
I think the first thing that I would say is that although we're all very relieved at the outcome today, nobody is going to be celebrating. This is a desperately sad case, and one that ultimately involves a 6-year-old child, a child called Jack, who lost his life. And we have to remember that because that's what's important here. But I do feel that the outcome is the right one. And I feel that because ultimately this was a junior doctor who many of us feel was scapegoated for widespread failings, including of the trust, that has yet to be held accountable.
Well, you say she was a junior doctor. She had 6 years under her belt, didn't she?
She did. So she's classed as a trainee, a junior doctor, which can be misleading. She had 6 years of postgraduate experience, but was still working very much under supervision of a consultant who should have been there on the day that Jack Adcock died, and didn't. So very much still a trainee, still very much a junior doctor who should not have been put in the situation that she was. And just to revisit some of the details of the case, when she turned up to work, she'd been off on maternity leave for over a year, just recently returned back. She should have had a second registrar. She didn't. The consultant who should have been there wasn't. And by midday, she was doing the work of 4 doctors at once. I think covering something like four floors and 6 wards, covering all the paediatric emergencies and A&E. For any doctor, let alone a junior doctor still in training, that's a huge workload, and one that just can't be considered safe for patients.
See, Nikki Adcock, who is Jack's mum, has addressed some of these points today on 5 Live. So if I could put them to you on her behalf, she said that this is, I think you've used the phrase already, a systemic failure. She said that's a load of rubbish. She said that this doctor knew Jack's medical history and still administered an incorrect fluid to him. She didn't pick up on the fact that he had cold hands and cold feet when she examined him. She didn't pick up on the fact that he didn't flinch when she put a needle into him. She didn't look at his x-ray when it returned back from the lab. And she kept him off antibiotics for 6 hours. She also then got him mixed up with another patient who wasn't even in the hospital at the time, who was a do not resuscitate patient. Surely you can't say those are systemic errors. That's a personal error, isn't it?
Certainly, and Nikki Adcock is right there. Hadiza certainly did make errors, several errors, and she would be the very first person to admit that. In fact, she was the very first person to admit that, and she sat down very candidly after Jack's very sad death and listed all of her errors honestly. And I think that was part of the reason that that she got herself into so much trouble, that she was so honest and reflected on things. But aside from all of that, there were multiple failings on behalf of the trust as well. So as I said, she was under a huge amount of pressure. Just returned from maternity leave. She should have never have been practicing unsupervised the way that she was, doing all that work. And there were failings on the trust's part as well. So they had a severe shortage of nurses on the children's assessment unit. 2 out of 3 nurses were from agency because they couldn't fill their rotas. The nurse that was actually looking after Jack that day was an adult nurse, not a paediatric nurse. Their IT system went down. There was a catalogue of failings on behalf of the trust. In fact, something like 72 that Leicester Royal Infirmary admitted to. So a catalogue of errors, and yet the trust have yet to be found accountable.
And yet still she was convicted of gross negligence manslaughter. So even though we've had this ruling today, which hospital do you think will employ someone with a gross negligence manslaughter conviction under their belt?
Sure, I think that's a very good question. The purpose of the Fitness to Practice panel today is to take into account Hadiza's fitness to practice medicine now. And we know she made errors. She's the first to admit that, but it's about whether she's safe to practice medicine now, and the tribunal, looking at all of the systemic failures and the context in which her errors occurred, feel that she's safe to return to practice. Now, I'm a doctor, but I'm also a mother, and I have absolutely no hesitation. I would have no hesitation at all in allowing Dr. Hadiza Bawa-Garba to treat my child. And the reason that I say that is because she's a clinician that has insight. She's reflected on her errors. She's been honest about her errors, and in the GMC's own words, she's done everything that she can to remediate and to put her errors right. Now, to me, that's the safest clinician in the hospital.
So you'd have no hesitation whatsoever in letting her treat your kids?
None at all.
One final point I'd like to put to you, if I may, from Nikki Adcock. This is a contention she has, that there was no interest in this doctor from other doctors until she was struck off by the General Medical Council. And that was when she noticed a lot of support coming the doctor's way. Is that a fair point she's making? I mean, you're a doctor lobby group. When did you get on board?
Sure. Yes, that is a fair point. I think the criminal conviction is ultimately a lay jury decision, and we have to respect that, and we have to accept that Hadiza has got a criminal conviction now, and that's the decision that was made. We respect that and we accept that. The GMC, however, have a different way of looking at things. The law is very adversarial in its approach. Its approach is to assign blame. It's not what happened. It's more who done it. Whereas I think the tribunal is more trying to explore exactly what happened, taking all the factors into account and taking a lot of the systemic failures into account that perhaps the jury didn't hear. Now, when the General Medical Council, that tribunal actually found her safe and didn't recommend her to be struck off the register, but the GMC, the General Medical Council, disagreed and then took her to the High Court to have her struck off. Now, that's what really worried doctors, and that is because we feel that the General Medical Council, as an expert, should understand the systemic failures, should understand that an individual is rarely solely to blame when things go wrong in healthcare. And the fact that they didn't seem to understand the pressure that doctors are under, the pressure that trainees are under, that really worried clinicians. And I think that was the point that a lot of people said, oh goodness, actually on any given day in the NHS, that could have been me.
And when you refer back to the trust in one of your previous answers, and I think you said there were 72 failings there, how can you reassure people listening to you tonight that when their children are being treated in another hospital in another part of the country, that there won't be a similar level of pressure and a similar level of failings?
So this is exactly why doctors feel so strongly that they needed to speak up about this case. And the risk of blaming one person and scapegoating one individual clinician was that all of those other errors, all of those other factors that very sadly contributed to Jack's death wouldn't be addressed. Now, that's why we're speaking up. That's why we're saying it is simply not safe to put a doctor under that much pressure and expect them to cover the workload of 4 doctors without putting patients at risk. Now, we are speaking up. Our voices are being heard. I think change is coming. And we hope that now those systemic failures will be addressed and that our wards will be staffed much better.
Dr Samantha Batt Rawden, chair of the independent doctor-led lobby group, the Doctors Association UK.